Oh boy. So when I saw that commercial in 1990, I thought that Skeletor flipping was like the coolest thing on the planet. And my parents got me that sword, and that sword was the coolest thing on the planet. And now I just want to go get it again and keep playing with it. But instead, I'm going to make you a lovely video. In the last video, we talked about what it's like to live on or to live in housing that's 10 to 20% of your take-home pay. And basically, it's like living in a dorm. And that takes a lot of, emotional adjustment for some people, especially if you've been out of a dorm for a while. I don't think that most people are going to want to live in that situation indefinitely. And I think even that situation provides you with more motivation to make changes in your work and in your income situation that would bring you enough income so that you could upgrade your housing and still save plenty of money to take care of your long-term goals. I didn't want to leave anybody kind of hanging in that abstract space of like, oh, he's telling me I need to live in a dorm forever. So this video is going to outline even more details around how long you might be living in that situation and what kinds of things you would do to get out of it, and kind of how much more money do you need to get out of it, and where does that put you, and what might things look like in, say, 5 years, or I guess 3 years is really all I cover here. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken this budget, the $60K budget that we worked on earlier, and I did two things. I cut $300 out of housing because this dorm-style housing should only be running you, say, $500. If you can get electricity and internet included, it becomes even cheaper, so that's great. And $500 is 14% of take-home pay. It's not less than 10%, but I don't care. Anything less than 20% is fantastic. I put that money into savings, so now we're saving $1,500 a month. At 43% of take-home pay, this is also absolutely fabulous. And at the end of the year, that's going to put us at $18,000 in our savings. Okay, $6,000 of that is going to be earmarked for an emergency fund, a $6,000 emergency fund. And then on the medical side, we're going to have $2,400, so $20,000 after this year of savings. Like, that's awesome, especially because your expenses altogether at this point are only about $2,000 a month total. And it's only going to take you 4 months to save up that emergency fund, which is also, I think, pretty fantastic that you can check that box quickly. So yes, this whole budget I'm showing right now assumes you have no debt, and it has you building your emergency fund before you contribute to retirement, because we need the emergency fund there to protect the retirement account, because we cannot afford to withdraw money from it. That'll be covered later in kind of a more how to invest type lesson. Okay, so here's the deal. You're making $60,000 a year. You can't do that in the Bay Area in the long run and have nice housing and save enough to retire and have kids or a family and so on. So you need to move up. Or you need to leave to somewhere with more reasonable housing costs, where on that same salary you would be able to have housing that you felt comfortable with, and you'd be able to have housing where you could raise kids in a decent school district. And that's the bottom line. The only reason to stay in the Bay Area is if you can form a career path for yourself that has you earning 60, 80, 100, 120, 200, a lot of money to cover the high cost of living here. So to do that, we're going to set ourselves a deadline. Okay, deadlines are great in the same way that topics for short stories are great. Oftentimes, by constricting ourselves, it forces us to be creative to match the deadline or to match the subject of the short story or whatever it is. A lot of people are paralyzed by too many possibilities. So we don't want to be paralyzed here. We want to have this restriction of a deadline. And I'm not saying the deadline has to be 6 months or the deadline has to be 5 years. You can come up with a deadline. Probably shouldn't be much more than 5 years. If you can't significantly increase your salary within 5 years, something's going on. So, yeah. Okay, So, ignoring the possibility that you're going to leave, I'm going to focus on what I know someone can do here to substantially increase their income. I'm on like a technical career track. I know a little bit about other parts of tech. I don't know that much about medicine. So I'm going to focus on tech. I'm going to focus in a most detailed way on the technical engineering side of tech. And then I'm also going to mention some things that are a little further from engineering that I know a little bit about, but not a lot. Okay, so in general, we want to think, what salary would we need to get into housing that we don't find as stressful as this kind of bunk bed dorm style housing? And what jobs would pay me enough money to upgrade that housing and also stay on track with saving? And then how long would it take me to get the job skills I would need to qualify for one of those jobs to move in that direction? So I gotta say, it doesn't take as long as most people think in order to learn the job skills for many technical jobs that pay well. All right? But you have to spend time on it. I would say that I think most people can do it in a year of focus, and I think pretty much everyone could do it in 2 years of focus. It really doesn't take that long. You don't have to have a computer science degree. You just need to be working on some of these things every day. An excellent way to do that is to offer yourself to a place for a really cheap salary relative to what that job usually makes, and then they will pay you that cheap for them salary, and you will get to learn that topic. So, for example, my first job was quality assurance, and I think quality assurance usually paid around $80, $85, but I didn't know that because I was 22, and I just looked at like salary.com for the entire United States because I didn't know to restrict it to a certain city, and I really didn't know what quality assurance was. So when I went to that job interview, I also had known that people from my school said that my major, on average, the average starting salary for people with my major was 60. So I just said in the interview, it'd be great if I could make 60. And I remember, I know like internally that guy was thinking like, oh, that's amazing. This is going to be so cheap. And so I started at 60, and I figured out, after a while, I was like, oh, I really messed up that salary negotiation. But it was an amazing opportunity to work with some of the smartest people I've worked at in my career. At BitTorrent was the company, and I learned a lot about working in tech. I learned about Linux computers. I learned some C++. I learned about networking, and I was paid to do it. And when I wasn't at my computer testing something by hand or writing up a test or following a tutorial that was related to some work I had to do, I was just reading general tutorials about Linux and about the systems and things that I had to deal with on a daily basis. It was very much like someone would come to me and say, we need you to set up a build system. And I would say, yes. And then I would go to Google and I'd say, what is a build system? How to set up build system. And the great thing about this is I wasn't paying for a master's degree. I was getting paid, decent money. And because I had selected cheap housing, remember, in Berkeley, and I didn't have a car yet, my life was affordable and I was learning. So it was way better than a master's degree from that point of view. The tools now online to learn technical subject matter are better than they have ever been before. You've got high definition YouTube videos. Those didn't exist when I was in high school. You have relatively cheap online courses that you don't even need to pay for because all this stuff is on YouTube. You have Stack Overflow that has every possible thing that could go wrong. Somebody's already asked the question and answered it. So when something goes wrong, you just ask Google about this error message that you're getting. You've got detailed written guides about how to set these things up. And so if you just spend your time following them, you will learn the stuff. So I'm going to mention a few things that I learned that helped me in my career, that are things that had to be done over and over again. And that, I know that somebody right now, right this moment, could go and look up and teach themselves. How to set up an email server. Okay, how to set up a WordPress site. There's something called a LAMP stack. That's Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. Linux is the operating system. Apache is a web server. MySQL is a scripting language that will process incoming, like a URL to the web server, and then construct some. Say MySQL? Did I say PHP? Crap. PHP is I'm going out of order. PHP is the scripting language. MySQL is a database where you would store data. So generally speaking, when you set up a LAMP stack, what you want to do is install all of the things, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and then you want to get it to do something very simple. You want to insert something into the database and then get the PHP to fetch that thing out of the database and serve it as a web page. And there are detailed tutorials on how to set all of this stuff up. There's another web framework called Django that instead of using PHP as the programming language would use Python. And of course there is Node.js, which is much more relevant and modern for existing websites. All of these things have detailed tutorials. You don't even really need to know what you're doing. You just need to follow the instructions. And the more of these instruction sets that you follow, you're going to find commonalities and you're going to be able to connect them together over time. And so I think one of the best ways to increase your income in the Bay Area is to get yourself into one of these more junior technical positions. I know two people who did it. One was an Italian major and one was a journalism major, and they both went to work at companies as junior engineers. And my experience is that after you work as a junior engineer for like a year or two, you can typically move into a more normal engineering position, pretty much all of which pays something above 100. So it's totally possible, and it doesn't need to take 10 years. It doesn't need to take 5. So that is a path that I encourage people to look at. Within engineering, I want to point out 3 different areas I think are great entry-level areas for someone looking to get into technical work, and which area you get into kind of depends on your personality and kind of depends on your interests. The number one place is front-end coding. So front-end coding is all of the visual stuff. If you're really into art, if you're really into design, and you can tell like different shades of blue apart, front-end engineering is a great place to start learning about technical things. Most of that is done now with something called cascading style sheets, which is a list of characteristics of a layout that you're looking at. And those characteristics could be the shape of things, the size of things, the color of things, how things flow together, how things react when you change the size of the page. There are tons of online tutorials for CSS, is what it's called. And as you use it more and more, it gets more and more complicated. You get more and more layers. But front-end engineers generally start building visual things, and then they work their way towards the back. So you work your way from building what appears in a web browser or in an iOS app or whatever it is, and then eventually you learn, how do I fetch different kinds of data from the server? And then you might learn, how do I serve different kinds of data from the server? And then you might look even further back and say, how would I construct a generic database on the server to ultimately pass things to a web browser or to a phone? Second area is called operations. Operations is the people who manage computer systems at organizations, and that management, a lot of times you need to know how the computer works in terms of like, how does it start up, how does it shut down, how does it talk to other computers, how do I measure how busy the processor is on the computer, how do I add a new user to this computer, how do I make this computer secure. So you need to learn those kind of fundamental things, but a lot of times you don't actually need to know that much about the details, the nitpicky details of the software that's running on the computer. Operations people are typically responsible for making sure that services for businesses stay up and running. They are the people who get paged when the software crashes and messes up, and they are responsible for restarting the software, or they are responsible for launching the software on a new computer, and things like that. I know a guy who had an anthropology degree, and I misspelled anthropology here. Yeah. And he then worked at a bookstore and had to, as part of his job working at the bookstore, had to manage the computer system at the bookstore. And he learned operations just by his responsibilities at the bookstore, managing the computer system there. So, operations like front-end coding, if you look up Bash scripting introduction or Linux introduction, you're going to start learning about things that are relevant for operations. And the more tutorials you look up, the more kind of walkthroughs that you go through. And especially if you can get a junior operations job at a company with people more experienced and work on this stuff on a daily basis, you can learn operations within a year that is valuable enough for someone to hire you at a great salary. So that's another interesting area to enter into the tech space. Final area is the area that I entered in, quality assurance. That is testing software. Quality assurance has more or less like two different sides to it. You have what's called black box, which is typically acting as a user and clicking through interfaces and messing with cell phones and, just generally trying to screw up the software as if you were an end user. And then you have what's called white box, which is typically writing computer code that either simulates a user automatically using the product in different ways, or white box code is code that tests other code. So the developers may have written functions that are supposed to, given certain inputs, they're supposed to give certain outputs, and you could write tests in computer code as a white box quality assurance engineer that feed those functions inputs and then check for expected output behavior. So I've done both, and learning that stuff is the same as learning front-end code and learning operations. You just need to spend time doing it. There are a lot of resources to work on it, and there's a range, especially in quality assurance, of technical skill needed to do the job. The white box side typically pays better than the black box side, but the black box side pays enough to get you out of that dorm room. I know people from gender studies majors, music majors, and again, the anthropology major, all of which have learned this stuff and taken careers in tech using these skills in these different areas, and over time have leveled themselves up and had more and more success in their career. So my point is, it's totally possible, and you don't have to have a computer science degree to be in the technical side of a company and to work in engineering. You do need to spend time on it to be good. And one of the best ways to spend time on it is to work at a place. And if you don't have any skills to begin with, you're going to be working for less money. But if you're dedicated to it, if you are obsessed because you need to get out of that dorm room, you're going to make it. It's going to happen. All right, so stepping outside of engineering, we're going to look towards design. Okay, there are a number of places like 99design.com where if you have Photoshop skills, you can do freelance graphic design work for businesses. So if you spend your time taking classes on lynda.com, learning about Photoshop and reading books about design, you can build up a portfolio that you can show people who are looking for logos or billboard designs or website designs or whatever it is. And you can make money on the side doing that, or you can use that portfolio to try to get a design job at a company. And so that's on the design side. I am definitely not a designer, so go seek out a designer friend of yours and ask their opinion about how they got started and what they think you should do. On the marketing side in technology, there is also a lot of opportunity because there are these user interface, complicated graphical user interface tools that are used to automate a lot of marketing now. And not only are they used to automate marketing, they are used to manage sales processes and manage customer relationship processes that might be more related to customer service. So, I'm sure everyone knows the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. Knowing how to use Salesforce in a detailed way is a very valuable skill. Google AdWords, that's where Google makes a ton of its money. And in knowing how to find efficient search terms in Google AdWords and how to narrow your audience down to the people who are most willing to pay for your product after clicking through on an ad. Those are very valuable skills, and those areas are also changing constantly. Search engine optimization, what you need to do to a website in order for Google to index it and for people to find it, given a certain topic or given a certain number of keywords. That's super valuable. There are meetups for all of these things. There are, I'm sure, Facebook groups for all of these things that you can put yourself on, and you're going to absorb this information over time. Simply knowing how to use Excel well, you start just by putting some numbers on Excel and then learning how to write a formula to sum a column of numbers. But, this gets more complicated over time. Over time you're going to say, well, I want to search to see if a certain number is in this column. How would I do that? So you type into Google how to search Excel, and they're going to show you a different kind of formula that you can use to do that. And over time you pick up different formulas, you learn how to string them together, and it becomes a kind of way of writing code. But a lot of financial modeling is done this way. A lot of cohort analysis is done this way when you're working on a subscription service and you want to understand how different marketing cohorts in different weeks performed over time. These are all things that are not extremely challenging to learn. They just take time. They don't require advanced degrees. They don't require undergraduate degrees. It just takes time and the willingness to read through the tutorials. I know people in tech with religion degrees. I know people coming from science and technology studies degrees. And I know multiple people with physics degrees who did not know that much computer science before they came in. They taught themselves. They made it happen. I know it's possible. You just have to be focused. So set a deadline, because setting a deadline is going to force you to back up your planning and say, okay, if I need to be here in 2 years, this is where I need to be next month. And, you're not going to be spending a lot of time in that dorm room, I hope. So it's going to force you to go to some of these meetups and to spend some time at coffee shops following tutorials. And I was totally there, at Phil's in San Francisco, looking at tutorials on how to build a website where you could log in with a username and a password. Most insecure login system I've ever built, but it taught me how modern websites are built and constructed. Also taught me how to drink coffee. A good experience. All right, so if you want to get out of this dorm room, it really only takes $80,000 a year instead of $60,000. Not that much. So, you might look at this, you might think, holy crap, a $33,000 raise? My goodness. But in Silicon Valley, a 33% raise. In Silicon Valley, it's not really a 33% raise. It's really a $20,000 raise, and a $20,000 raise is a good raise, but it's not like a mind-blowing amount of money. All right, you walk around and see the number of Teslas. $20,000 is not a mind-blowing amount of money. I told you before, America has money, Silicon Valley has money. The money is here. You can totally work on these technical skills and find an opportunity in the next, certainly 2 years, to upgrade to a job paying $80,000. Alternatively, you can keep your $60,000 job and use some of these job skills on the side. You'll just need to get $1,667 of extra income, that's pre-tax, per month. Now, at a pay rate of $30 an hour, which is roughly what the $60,000 job is, that's going to be 55 extra hours a month. But if we change that to a pay rate that's more commensurate with the type of skill, which is, say, maybe $50 an hour, then we're talking about less. We're talking about, let's see, 1,667 divided by 50, 33 hours, extra a month. And if we say that you're working 8-hour days for one of your, weekend days always, that's going to be 4 times 8 is 32. You're basically there. So you would just need to continue doing your $60K job, and now you're working one of your weekend days with these technical skills. You can make it. So what I did is I said, okay, if you're going to make 80,000, we want to get you out of that $500 dorm house. We're only going to put you though in an $800 living situation. That's either going to be a decent room alone, or if you have a better half, it can be a $1,600 studio between both of you. And there are $1,600 studios. There's one right here. I don't think that beyond living in a studio with someone that you like, that life gets much better. I haven't seen that it gets that much better for me in terms of my happiness. So I wouldn't even recommend that somebody move up from a studio to a 1-bedroom. I would just say chill out with the studio and, probably put your extra money that you have into travel. Here, what I've done is I've stuck an extra chunk of money into the savings. Not necessarily all retirement savings, but we have the option now. They're up to $2,000 to max out our retirement. That's pretty cool. And I also added this money back to the flex spending because now that you're not spending all your time obsessing over learning these new job skills, because you can practice them at, your new work job. I added $200 more to the flex category because now you can loosen up, have more fun. There was probably already a little bit more wiggle room in the $300 category anyway, so I'm not worried about this. Again, this is roughly a budget that I live on right now, and I feel fantastic about. After, the first year I pointed out you got about $20,000 total in savings. After this second year, you're up to, $43,000 in your savings and $4,800 medical. And of course, I guess the emergency fund is included in that. I think it's multiplied at times 12. Yeah. So, cool. Yeah. So this is a nice, after you finish 2 years of working, you've got you're very stable. You don't have to sweat anything. You don't have to worry about anything. You've got your separate emergency fund. You've got your retirement savings going at a nice clip. And you've got, this medical dedicated tax-free medical fund. That's great. Another big benefit that a lot of people don't realize is the benefit of sacrificing and living this dorm situation is that you train yourself to save money. Okay, being here for 12 months is not just 12 months to pressure you to learn these things that are especially profitable in Silicon Valley. It's also to train you to figure out what you're going to do while you're not spending money to be happy. And you're going to benefit because after a year has passed, you're kind of coasting in a lot of ways in terms of saving money at this point because you're continuing to do a lot of the activities that made you happy when you were spending less. And that's going to help you to, chunk this extra money at savings while still remaining happy. If you work your way from 80 to 100, which frankly, you can continue doing the same job skills or only slightly different job skills that you were doing when you were making 80, and you'll kind of by seniority automatically be upgraded over time to 100, just by the fact that you get better from doing this stuff every day, then we can get you up to 100. And at 100, what I have here is I'm chucking even more money into savings. Again, I don't upgrade housing because I really don't think that you get, especially if you're living with a partner in a studio, I don't think you get that much more joy out of spending that much more on housing. I would much rather spend extra money on travel once I get to 100 because I think that seeing the world is fantastic. I have bumped your flex spending up by another $90 just because now, you've got that much more money to spend because you're making more money. At the end of this year, according to this budget, you have about $79,000 saved, $3,600 medical. Depends on what you do. But the point is this. If you started this at 22 and you ended it at 25, and now you're thinking about having kids, you got $79,000 in savings to think about if you want to stay and try to have kids, or if you want to go somewhere else cheaper and have kids. If you don't have kids yet, you can build up even more money. Your housing is 14% of your take-home pay, extremely healthy. Your spending is still, only around $2,000 a month. So let's see if this is right. Oh no. No, the spending is going to be a little bit higher. So the spending is going to be C57. Let's be completely honest here. C57 through C65. It's still going to be around 2,000. Oh no, I didn't do that right. Okay, no, I wanted to say... Okay, it needs to be C55 minus the savings, which would be C56. 2,500, right? So you're going to have to put a little bit of the savings toward your emergency fund to bump it up from, I guess, the 6,000 it was before to say more like 7,500. But that's still only 10% of this total money that you have saved. So point is, if you get laid off, if the economy goes bad, it's only been 3 years into your career and you are still protected, you still have time to use these job skills that you have, and you've got 3 months to go out and find your next job move. So you don't have to accept the first thing that comes at you. You can take your time, apply to a number of different places. You know, once you get some acceptances, play them against each other, bump that salary back up, and keep going. So this is how I imagine somebody getting out of that dorm room and increasing their income. My career has worked very similarly to what I just described to you. So I know that it works, and that's why I'm saying it in this video. I'm sure there are other ways to do this. I would love to hear about them from people. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. There are a lot of ways to make things work, and the more we talk about it and the more we connect with people and read and try new things and, you know, play a funny movie in the background as we play with some new technology on the weekend, over time it works, and it helps get to, you know, a place of abundance and thriving and all of those words that I don't particularly like saying, but some people do. All right. So that's the end of this video. I'd love to hear any comments you have on it. I'd like to hear any concerns you have on it. Maybe I should even make a video going through one of these technical tutorials to show people that it's really not that big of a deal. I'll have to think about that. It's not really in the area of personal finance, but, you know, whatever people need to hear, whatever is inspirational, I'll do it. You know, get her done. All right. That's going to be it for this video. Have a fantastic evening.